Alright guys, welcome to another video. Today we're going to talk about why I don't think Rise of Kingdoms is dying. This is something that I probably hear or read someone type in chat or like in a message board or something at least every week, probably like every other day. And I'm going to give my thoughts on it. So one, we're going to go over when does this game actually die, right? There's a very like specific metric you could use to determine that. Reasons why I think that people think the game is dying, what I think fuels this narrative, what debunks this narrative, in my opinion, and also the way forward. Like if I could give Lilith suggestions, I had a say, which I don't, but if I did, what I think they could do to really help move this game forward. Okay, so first, when does this game die? It's actually really simple. It's when the developers do not feel like it's worth it to continue the game. That's actually it, okay? It's not when one player retires. It's not when a kingdom dies. It's not even where Rise of Kingdoms is on the download chart, popularity, daily users. There's none of that. There's a point when the developer will feel like, hey, you know what? We're not making enough money where it's worth it for us to put money into the game. So there's a lot of different factors that could contribute to that, but this is actually the final determining factor, right? Because if, say, like every player that's been playing right now for over 3 years just retires, but it's still worth it for the developers to continue the game will actually live on. You just won't be playing it. Okay, so let's make that really clear. Now, are there trends? Yes. Okay, so this game, like many other different genres, got a huge boost during COVID, right? Like Peloton blew up during COVID, mobile games blew up during COVID, because when you force people home, they have nothing else to do. They start finding things to do with their lives. Right now, as you start playing this game, my account right now is like a year and 9 months old. Right, so not quite 2 years, getting close to 2 years. And for a lot of people, they still consider that a younger account. So you can imagine if somebody started during COVID, they actually start really getting to the end game right around 2022, right? Beginning mid 2022. And once you get to the end game and you do some stuff, then people are going to start falling off, right? Now you're hearing a lot of the older big name players are talking about retirement. Some of them retired. And it's just because there is a shelf life to anything you do, right? So when you start something, it's going to be novel and exciting, and you're working towards something. And when you actually finally achieve that, right, for this, it's the end game, then unless you're constantly finding a new why, for lack of a better word, to continue playing the game, at some point, it's going to lose its appeal, and people are going to move on and find another challenge or something else that engages and interests them. Okay, so it is very real that we're at a point now where a lot of the bigger established players are not getting as much out of the game anymore because they accomplished or have been through so much, and it's time to move on. Okay, but does that mean the game is dying? Not necessarily, because there's always new kingdoms starting. And if you guys didn't know this, unless Lilith changed this, a new kingdom is created whenever the last two kingdoms reach their first achievement, which is 20,000 players actually reach the achievement of Bronze Age. So 20,000 players and two kingdoms have to actually reach the first chapter of the achievement for the next kingdom to be created. Okay, I don't know what it's at now, right? But at the peak, a new kingdom was being created like every 13 hours. Last I read, it was like every 2.5 days or something like that. But the whole point is, if new kingdoms are being created, there are literally new players that are actually signing up and playing the game. And then the way this game works, the metrics for this game is actually near the top for strategy games, right? There is a metric for how many players stay active after the first day, stay active after the 7th day, and then after the 28th day, right? And about for a top game, like for a top performance, top performing game, about half the players are going to drop off after the first day. That's just reality of this game. Okay, Rise of Kingdoms compared to that metric actually does pretty well. The one I found, it was an article published in December of 23, right, so 4 months ago at this point. Rise of Kingdoms retains about 41% of its players after the first day, right? So the top is 50%, about 50%. Rise of Kingdoms is actually fairly close to that, near the top. Okay, so if there are new kingdoms being created, and there are, that means new players are actually playing this game. So the game isn't dying, right? And for me personally, where my channel is going, a lot of the people that reached out to me for mentoring or questions are actually younger or newer players. And so I get to see what the activity level and really even the spend level for these younger kingdoms are. And they're pretty crazy. I'll be honest, a lot of these newer kingdoms, their activity and spend level is probably just as much or even more than some of these late game Imperium kingdoms. They're younger, they haven't even gotten a season of conquest yet, right? They don't necessarily have content creators. So a lot of the content that's being covered isn't covering these younger kingdoms. So we just don't hear about it or know about it, okay? But when does this game die? It's when the developers do not feel it's worth it and continue the game. Or else, the game is actually gonna still keep living on. All right, so the reasons though why people think the game is dying, or these are the reasons that are being cited. So one, kingdoms are shrinking, right? Oh, well, before, a 4 alliance kingdom used to actually just be average size. Now, like, almost every kingdom at the end game is going to a 1 alliance kingdom. Look up the earlier, the kingdoms in the earlier game. They also actually have a lot of alliances, okay? This is more of an end game, and especially at the higher seeding, these top kingdoms are shrinking, okay? And then also the Imperial line is dropping. And a couple of reasons for that. We're getting to a point where the player base in a lot of these top kingdoms, a lot of them, frankly, are just retiring, right? And there's actually young blood coming in. They still need to develop. And also, it's just kind of the nature of this game. I think the game, because it got a big boost from COVID, right? A lot of the players that started playing during that time, or maybe a little bit before or a little after, are reaching that point now where some of them are retiring. And frankly, the content creators, right? If you look at the big content creators in this game, for the most part, they all actually have older accounts than me. They've been playing for a lot longer than me. So from their perspective, the players they know, the ones they're seeing, and the kingdoms that they're covering, the top kingdoms, those are shrinking. And honestly, a lot of them probably will die, right? But then guess what? Younger kingdoms are probably going to grow and take their spot. And I do think a lot of this narrative is being fueled by content creators, and a lot of these big content creators are older players, and also because other players are saying so. It's kind of perpetuating that. Now, I like to call this, what I think is fueling this narrative, I like to call this like the back in my day effect, right? If you guys were ever teenagers, which if you're watching this based on my YouTube metrics, you're all probably past the teenage years by this point, at least like 99% of you. It's one of the most annoying things for me when I was a kid or growing up, right? You have this older person just like, oh, back in my day, or you're just so young, you don't know any better, right? They just tell you that all the time. And actually part of that is true. I was just so young, I didn't know a lot, but it's almost like human nature, right? Every generation, like you felt like basketball fans, they think their era of basketball was the best, and then like this new generation is soft, weak, can't play defense, whatever. It's the same thing in this game, actually. A lot of the older players that have a voice, the content creators, right? Well, back in my day, there's this many alliances who were doing this. It was crazy. It's not. I'm not saying it like it's a bad thing. They're doing anything wrong, but it's human nature to look back upon your time with fondness and then think, the world or this game or whatever is going to shit. So that's just a human psychology. Also, I learned a lot about how the world works after I started making YouTube videos. All right, so you've all heard of the algorithm, right? Well, with YouTube, and once I learned this, I realized, okay, with social media, it's same thing, different flavor, same thing. With like the news, mainstream media, all that stuff, the same thing. There's an algorithm they look for, right? So in YouTube, something that's very important is one, when someone watches your video, do they drop off within, I want to say it was the first 30 seconds or a minute, I can't remember that off the top of my head, but there's like the first X amount of time, it's a short amount of time what is your retention rate, right? Do people actually like your videos? Do they comment? If you get high engagement and you get a high retention rate in the first, say, like 30 seconds, then YouTube is actually going to push a video out. Okay, so the 3 topics, and you guys will notice this now that I said it, the 3 topics that get a lot of engagement and actually hit the algorithm. And in this case, if you think algorithm means what the audience responds to, drama videos, saying stuff like, oh, the game is dying, things like that. And then also beginner guides, right? So like, this is a new beginner guide, things I wish I knew when I first started, this is how you could get more kills, things like that. Those are actually the videos that are going to get the most engagement. Okay, so and it hits algorithm. Okay, so if drama videos or things like videos where you're just saying the game is dying is going to get more clicks, right? I'm not saying it's maybe I am, but the whole point is, guess what? Content creators are going to be incentivized to make videos like this a lot more often, and it gets propagated, and then people think it's true, right? And also, finally, this COVID era, right? You can't compare how a game performs now to its peak when COVID was happening. Hopefully we don't ever see something like that again. But when you lock down the whole world for X amount of months, where you force them to stay home and have nothing else to do, right? You're not going to get that kind of traffic engagement and people picking up the game compared to like 2020, as you will now. So just because you're comparing a trend, right? Okay, back the trend now compared to 2020, it's on a downward trajectory, right? That means the game is dying. No. There's a lot more other factors. You have to actually take into the actual landscape of, or the situation of why that happened into account. Okay, so I think some of the things are actually what fuels the narrative, and then what debunks this narrative. Okay, so first one, let's go with World of Warcraft. World of Warcraft is still going now, and people have been saying that it's dying for like 18 years now. Okay, so World of Warcraft came out in 2004. Their first expansion, Burning Crusade, came out in 2007. I actually started playing World of Warcraft, I think, in 2007. Now I think about it, when that first expansion came out. I've been playing it on and off. I haven't been playing it the whole time. But the whole point is, even from when the first expansion came out, people have been saying this game is dying. Okay, does World of Warcraft, the numbers it's doing now compared to its peak? No, it doesn't. Right, at its peak, it was like one of its kind. It was, it was a magical time when I first started playing. Now was already a few years in. I can only imagine if I started playing in like 2004, 2005, what that game would be like. And if I look back on when I first started playing, there's nostalgia. It's awesome, right? And I trust me, I do this too. I'm like, oh man, I wish they would do this. Why did they make it so much easier to get like PvP gear at the end? Right, and like, oh, like there was like a golden area. I wish I could go back to that time, right? That doesn't mean the game is necessarily dying now. Is it not doing as well now as it was during its peak? Of course, but they're coming out with new expansions. Developers are still tweaking and updating the system. It's just not like people have been saying it's dying for 17 years, right? Like at some point, you have to actually have something more concrete. Or else, if the game keeps going on, the developers keep putting money into it, putting on new expansions. There's new players playing. Like it's not generating as much money as it was before or whatever. But you can't say it's actually dying, right? Another thing that debunks the narrative for me is you just look at the young kingdoms. Okay, if you put more attention on the young kingdoms, you see the level of spend there, the level of activity, how many alliances they have. And then how there's still a new kingdom being created every few days. And to create a young kingdom or a new kingdom, right, you need 20,000 users that actually hit the Bronze Age combined in the last 2 kingdoms that were created. Then that means there's still new users coming in. So if you actually go look at it from a young kingdom perspective, or if you look at it from a younger player's perspective, they don't think the game's dying. Right, it's older content creators and people in the end game, and then in these like message boards or Discord channels that are saying that and propagating that. And then finally, there's still new innovation coming out. Right, you don't keep coming out with new KVK formats, trying to tweak like this and that for balance the game, coming out with new ideas for a game that you already gave up on, right? So if the developers haven't gave up on the game and they're still innovating and trying to do things, the game is not dying. And finally, way forward for me. So this is just personal recommendations. Last year, Lilith made an announcement that they plan on actually doing a complete graphics overhaul for the game sometime this year. Haven't heard anything about it. Hope it still happens. They also talked about ways of making the server better so you get less lag during KVK. I think that would be a huge improvement for one, the graphics will attract new people, but it will almost breathe it'll be a breath of fresh air for older existing players, right? Because it will be like you're playing the same game, but it also will feel kind of new if everything looks different and better. Also, the server overhaul will make like the bigger KVKs more fun and more engaging, so I think that would help a lot. And they already announced that they were working on those two things. I think the game now, right? It started in 2008, it's 2024, so they're in their 6th year. It's important that they start figuring out, and I think they're already kind of doing that, right? But it's how do you balance the incentive for new players, right? So as a new player comes in, right, if an old player has such a big head start where they can never catch them, then the incentive isn't there. But you want to balance it where the newer players can bridge the gap with the older players, but then there is a incentive for the older player. If I put in X amount of money and time, right, I am going to have that advantage over the younger player. So I think that balance for the most part is there. They could maybe tweak a few things, but as you're getting to this period where you have players that are maybe 5-6 years older than the newer players, how do you balance the advantage of the older players while not turning off or detracting from new players starting the game? But also the old players almost has this advantage where to hold on to that advantage and enjoy their advantage, they actually keep playing and keep spending. Okay, so that's something that I think Lilith, I'm sure they're already paying attention to and figuring out how to make that even better. And then finally, you can't be recreating the past, right? So I talked about World of Warcraft and the magical time from when I first started playing, right? Like I hear this a lot, right? This is before my time, but like, oh yeah, COVID was crazy. There was so much activity. There was like 8 alliances in the kingdom. You can't be trying to recreate the past for this game, right? Instead of trying to relive or recreate the glory days, I think it's important to actually innovate for the future. Okay, if we're not getting the same kind of like massive surge in user base, but we're still getting a steady influx of players, how do we actually start changing the game, changing the experience? So maybe the dynamic of the game will be very different compared to say 2 years ago. How do we make it just as fun for the new players and innovate for the future? And I actually think Lilith is still doing that, and that's probably the number one reason why I don't think the game is dying, because instead of using some metric to compare how it was before, if the people in charge of the game are still actually putting money into it, developing and trying to figure out how to make this game better, more creative, and then bridge this kind of gap between old and newer players, then that means that there's still some fight and the game's not dying. Does it mean the game can't die? Of course not. But I don't think it's responsible for a content creator to say the game is dying when there's all these signs that it's not. And also, I just want to put this out there so the people that keep parroting that narrative, just to think about it from a different perspective. And I don't know, usually I use numbers, right? Like I somehow have become known as a numbers guy. I went down that path a little bit to look up different numbers, but I just didn't feel like using the numbers would actually be able to communicate really the message I wanted to communicate for this. Okay, I'm not being paid by Lilith. You know, I'm not even in their content creator program yet. This is just my personal opinion. You know, I love this game. I think it's really fun. Seeing the activity, the community, and then just all the possibilities that are yet to come. I just don't think this game is close to dying. Okay, so if you watch all the way to the end, you haven't yet, please like and subscribe to the videos. I talk about the algorithm. It actually does really help. And also leave a comment, and I'll talk to you guys next time.